Welcome to the show, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Before we begin today's episode, I want to say thank you to our newest supporters, Whitney and TF. We truly appreciate your generosity. You can find a full list of our wonderful supporters in the show notes. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, you can become a patron at patreon.com/paranormal mysteries. Or if you prefer to make a one-time donation, please visit buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And as always, subscribing to the podcast and sharing it with your friends is one of the best ways to show your support, and we appreciate it. If you've witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. Please remember, no matter how insignificant or bizarre you believe your experience may seem, I'd like to hear about it. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Now, with that being said, let's get ready and start the show. Tonight's 11 listener stories involve phenomena from almost every corner of the paranormal realm. So whether you're at work, at home, or on the go, get ready to experience the paranormal through the eyes of our listeners.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground, which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7, 8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, and thank you for being here. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. Our first story of the night comes from Chloe. Chloe's story is called The Unexplained. Chloe says, "Hi, I've wanted to share a couple of experiences that have happened to me over the years. Nothing too crazy, but there's definitely been some weird things. I live in Northern California, and have always been interested in spirituality and paranormal type things, but I haven't had any experiences until I was maybe 15 or 16. I had this walk-in closet when I was a teenager, and in the back of it was this dollhouse that was once my great-grandmother's, that was built probably in the 1940s, or maybe even in earlier years than that. My great-grandma had passed away maybe a year before this specific encounter. One day I was cleaning out my closet, just getting rid of some things I didn't need anymore. I bent over to grab something that was on top of the dollhouse, and I stood back up, and about 10 seconds later, I heard someone whisper, "Hey," in my ear. It freaked me out, and I thought it was my little brother just messing with me or something, so I ran out to the living room to see where he was, and he was just lying down asleep on the couch. I looked around to see if anyone else was out there in the house, and no one else was. I thought about it for a while and came down to the conclusion that it was just my great-grandma trying to communicate with me, and I think that dollhouse holds at least some of her energy. Fast forward a few years to when my family moved into a new house. I was maybe 18 or so now and had my first sleep paralysis encounter. One night I was dead asleep and felt like I was dreaming when I felt this pressure on my chest, almost as if someone was hugging me from the back, but super tight, to the point where I couldn't breathe, and it kept getting tighter and tighter. It was weird, because I was awake at this point, and my eyes were open, but I couldn't move and couldn't yell, even though I was trying my hardest to. It lasted only probably 10 seconds, but it was the freakiest 10 seconds I've ever felt. I all of a sudden felt this release, and I could breathe again, and I got up extremely quickly and ran out of my bedroom and downstairs. My heart was beating super fast, and I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. After I calmed down a bit, I went back up to my room and left the light on to go back to sleep. I didn't know about the concept of sleep paralysis at the time, so my brain immediately thought that it was a spirit or a demon trying to harm me, and I didn't know why. I'm still not sure if there is any connection between sleep paralysis and spirits. Who knows what it could be? The last part of this story didn't much involve me, but a couple of my friends, and I was there to witness it. Fast forward a few more years now. This was recently, only a couple of weeks ago, where me and my friends were hanging out, and one of my friends started telling us about this demon that he has. He told us about multiple random things happening, like both his TVs stopped working out of nowhere, his PS4 exploding and catching on fire, etc. When we were at his house, one of our friends started to try to bless the house with a candle in his hand, and he started saying prayers or whatever it is you say when you bless a house. He wasn't holding the candle anywhere near his face or his hair, but his hair caught on fire. He wasn't expecting anything to happen to him, so this really got to him. I'm not really sure where he went after that, but eventually it was just me and my best friend Paulina sitting at the table. She was drawing up a little sketch of a tattoo she was planning, and the table shook out of nowhere. Mind you, I was not leaning on it or touching it at this time. She then said, "Chloe, stop moving the table." And I told her, "I'm not. You stop moving it." So she then leaned back at this point, and neither of us were touching it, and we both saw it shake. We both looked for the cat, and the cat was on the other side of the room. I don't want to conclude this as something paranormal, because it could have been, I don't know, the AC current or something. I'm not sure, but it was definitely strange, especially after our friend's hair catching on fire. Anyways, that's all I have to share with you. If you have any input or anything, please feel free to let me know your thoughts. Our next story of the night comes from Anonymous. Anonymous's story is called Lady in Black. Anonymous says, "So I just started listening to your podcast, and it reminded me of something weird that I had seen once. This happened several years ago during the summer. Me and my mom were up late at night, and there was some reason that I needed to go outside. I think it was to get something out of the car. In order to get to the carport, I have to walk around my house, as we don't use the door that leads directly to the carport. We live right on the main corner, so there are 3 roads, kind of in a Y shape. One that went straight, and one that turned in front of my house, and on the corner there's a map with a light. Because we live on a main corner, the cars like to speed around without stopping, so I always look both ways before crossing, and when I looked up the street, there was what looked like a woman standing near the map. Mind you, this was around 12:30 or 1 in the morning, and even though there were still cars, a person standing out there wasn't expected. At first, I thought it was a homeless person or something, because they go through there all the time to take the recycling out of the trash, but she didn't have any bags with her or anything. She was pretty tall, around 6 feet, and completely black, but where she was standing, though, she should have been completely lit up. I stood there for a minute, until she turned and looked at me, and I ran back inside as fast as possible. Needless to say, whatever it was that I was getting out of the car wasn't too important. My mom said that I was lying and didn't even leave the porch, but I wasn't. I know what I saw, and I will never be convinced that what I saw was normal. Our next story of the night comes from Catherine. Catherine's story is called My 2 Most Memorable Experiences. Catherine says, "Hey Nick, I just found your podcast on Spotify yesterday. I am a very skeptical person, but still have a 6th sense in many moments, and I am pretty intuitive. My first experience that I can tell has to do with spirits of the dead. I was 11 years old when my grandma died. I didn't have a very close relationship to her, as she was a difficult woman. The last 2 years of her life she spent at a nursing home, but she was still sharp in her head. I was pretty sad still when she died. She had been the first death in my family that I experienced consciously. About 3 weeks after she died, I woke up one night after I had had a few little dreams with my grandma in them. They were little ordinary bits of dreams, like her giving a book to me or whatever. I don't remember exactly. But I woke up out of these dreams around 2 a.m., and even though I didn't have a nightlight and my room was usually dark, there was a strange glow in my room. My grandma was standing next to my bed. I could see her, and still she wasn't there. She stood there for maybe 10 seconds, her presence overwhelming me, and when she left me with the incredible feeling of bliss. Pure happiness. Complete joy. I don't know the right word for it. I knew she had come to say goodbye. I never told anybody of this, but I wrote about it in my diary. After a few years, I told my parents, but they reacted as expected. The second experience was when I was about 29 years old. My husband and I had moved into this little old farmhouse. Our 2 kids were about 8 months and almost 2 years old. The house belonged to 4 siblings who had grown up there, farming. One of the siblings had taken over and actually ran the house as a farm, but one day fell off his tractor, dead. His twin sister was still very attached to the house and was there almost every day to tend to the garden. She was a weird, sad, and unhappy lady. The house was cool, although a little creepy. There were 2 places in the house where I just didn't like being. One was in the basement at the bottom of the stairs. The other place was in the attic, the top floor, right at the entrance to the little smoke room that they had used in the farmhouse. One could redirect the smoke from the wood stove up the chimney and into the smoke room to smoke ham and such. We had heard weird noises in the house more than a few times, but what happened that night was more than normal. One night, my husband and I were sitting in the kitchen. It was around 10 p.m., and the kids were fast asleep. All of a sudden, we heard thumping from upstairs. My baby daughter's bedroom was right above us, and I thought she had woken up and was now crawling around the bedroom floor. She was a little bit of a night owl sometimes. But then the thumping slowly started to turn into actual footsteps, heavy footsteps. I looked at my husband and he looked at me. We both heard it very clearly, and all of a sudden, we got scared for our baby. We jumped up at the same time, ran to the bottom of the stairs, and turned the light switch for the lamp on at the top of the stairs. It came on for a split second, and then went out, with a little ping. We ran up in the dark, ready to face an intruder with heavy boots. We burst into our daughter's bedroom, but nothing. She was sound asleep. I am, as I said, a skeptic, but what convinces me of that story is that we both heard everything. We saw the light come on and then go out. We thought the old bulb had just broken, and you know what? The next day, the light worked fine again when I wanted to replace the bulb. I called a friend who has connections to the other side. I told her the story, and she said she'd see what she could do. After a week or 2, I noticed that the weird sounds that we had kept hearing every now and then had stopped, and I didn't feel creeped out when I was in those 2 places in the house, the attic and the basement. I called her to ask if she had done anything, and she said, "Oh yes, I have traveled there. There was a man looking for the farmer. He wanted to apologize for something. I told him that the farmer was dead too, and that he too should walk into the light, which he did. You should have peace in your house now." Our next story of the night comes from Anonymous. Anonymous says, "So the house that my mother lives in, we think is haunted. My grandmother passed away a few years ago, and we inherited some things. She was cremated, but I think her soul attached itself to one of these items that we got. We have several animals, and they always seem to avoid the corners of the house. Recently, I had a birthday, and the night before, I felt the vibes that my grandmother used to give off. Mind you, this was at midnight when I felt this way. This part is important for the rest of the story. My room is in the middle on the top floor, and I have a desk with a gaming chair near my door. I have the chair facing my desk with my giant stuffed unicorn that my mom gave me when I was little. My bed is up against the wall, across the room from my desk. A few nights ago, I woke up at 2 a.m, and I saw someone standing on my chair, and the chair was facing me. It was weird. I just brushed it off as a part of my dream, but I woke up again about 10 minutes later, and it was still there. He looked like he was holding something, but I'm not sure what it was. It looked like my stepdad, but he never comes in my room at night, and I close my door at night while I'm sleeping. This is freaky, and I don't think it was a ghost, because my stepdad isn't dead, and he was sleeping in his room. If you know what this is, please tell me, as I'm a little freaked out. Thanks for reading. Our next story of the night comes from Zoila. Zoila's story is called Duendes, Dwarves of the Forest. Zoila says, "Hi, Nick. I am a big fan of the show. I recently shared a paranormal story with you, and I figured I'd share more of my stories. But this time, it's more about the folklore and dwarves of the forest. I came across one of your old episodes where you talked about fairies and forces of the forest, which inspired me to share this. As I stated on my first submission, I grew up in the Philippines. My culture believes in dwarfs, or duendes, which roam around the forest or fields. Duendes are known to live in anthills and are pretty much harmless unless provoked. My mom told me that when I was 3, she would always see me talking to myself and playing by the anthill near my grandma's house. She figured that it was harmless and that it might just be another case of imaginary friends, as most kids go through the phase. Until one day, I developed weird bumps all over my body. It looked like chicken pox, so she brought me to the doctor, but the doctor did not know what it was. He gave me some medications, but to no avail. My mom took me to many other different specialists, dermatologists, and bought different medications, but nothing seemed to work, and no one could really truly explain what it was. As a last resort, my mom decided to go to a witch doctor, which is very common in the Philippines, and the witch doctor stated that I was cursed by a duende because I ruined their house. It turned out that my imaginary friend was a duende. The witch doctor prayed over me and instructed my mom to fix the anthill to keep the peace between us and the duendes. When we got home, my mom saw that the anthill was indeed smashed, so she tried to fix it as much as she could, and the next day, my skin condition completely disappeared. I don't know about you, but this might be pretty compelling evidence that there are unexplained creatures among us. Once again, thank you for doing what you do, and I look forward to more episodes. Rest assured, I'll be sending more stories to you. Until next time, Zoila. Zoila shared another of her stories, and this one is called Entity of Death. Zoila says, "Hi, Nick. I had time to write one more story, so here it goes. I have always been sensitive to paranormal entities, and have gotten pretty much used to it at this point, but this is by far one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. It happened around 3 a.m. I was sleeping when I started to feel my heart palpitating, which woke me up. This type of feeling happened to me before, but this one was particularly different. This is usually one of the signs that there's an entity near me. When I feel this way, I usually know who is visiting me. It happens a lot to me because my late grandmother always visits me, but this one was different. This entity was a complete stranger to me. Though I can't see it, it felt like a woman, and there was something about it that felt evil. I was terrified, so I decided to close my eyes and move towards the wall side of my bed, which, by the way, proved to me that it wasn't sleep paralysis because I could move. I felt my leg, the one farthest from the wall, move a little, which indicated that something sat on my bed. I was completely scared, so I decided to pray the Lord's Prayer. However, in my panic, I forgot how the prayer went. I remembered saying, "Our Father," over and over again, trying to help myself remember the rest of the prayer. And then suddenly, I heard a woman's voice say, Our Father," in a mocking way. The entity was laughing at me as if it was gaining pleasure from my despair. I decided to change prayers, and this time I tried the Apostles' Creed, which started with, "I believe in God," and again, I couldn't remember the rest of the lines. Yet again, the entity started mocking me and screaming, "I believe in God, I believe in God." At this point, I was terrified and hopeless, and then I remembered my aunt had given me a picture of the Virgin Mary, which I framed and hung on my wall. I decided to pray Hail Mary, and by some miracle, I was able to remember all the lines. After praying 3 prayers, I felt the entity leave my bed, and I slowly felt more at peace. My heart rate went down, and I was able to fall back to sleep again. The next day, I woke up in a sense of panic. I felt like someone I knew was going to pass away. I was worried for my loved ones, so I decided to pray the rosary in an attempt to keep them safe. The next day, I got a call that a coworker that I had gotten close with throughout the years had passed away that night before. This might just be a big coincidence, but I really don't know what to think. I would like to hear your opinion about this. Do you think that these are two separate events? I value your opinion, and thank you for reading. Have a good day, Zoila. Our next story of the night comes from Shay. Shay's story is called Idaho UFO. Shay says, "While I was still in high school, my family lived on a mountainside overlooking a huge valley. From my bedroom window above my bed, I could just about view the entire sky, and would often sit up there at night and just peer out, watching airplanes and satellites drift by through the sea of stars. It was very dark out there with little to no light pollution, so each star shone through as bright as the next, and I would watch them as the earth turned. One night I was watching around 1 a.m. and saw what looked like a shooting star fly across the sky. It didn't seem to go as fast as one, however, but it was definitely faster than an airplane or a satellite. I watched it, waiting for it to burn out or to see the red and blue lights associated with airplanes, when it suddenly and quickly slowed to a stop. A second later, a light as bright as a spotlight shone directly into my bedroom. I remember jumping from the shock of this light that seemed as if someone was outside of my window, holding a flashlight in my face. My bedroom was on the second floor. Then, just as suddenly as it had lit up my room, the bright light cast into my bedroom disappeared. I looked out just in time to see this small shooting star-like light that was just a second ago stopped and hovering in midair shoot directly up into the atmosphere. I watched as it got smaller and smaller until I could no longer see it among the rest of the stars in the sky that night. I sat there for a few minutes in complete shock and quickly grabbed my phone and wrote down everything that I saw, just so I wouldn't forget or think that I was dreaming. That was the only time that I saw it happen throughout all of the nights that I gazed out of my window before bed, waiting to see it again, but nothing has happened since. I have only told a few people about this experience so they wouldn't think that I was crazy, but I know what I saw, and I can still remember it as clear as day. Thank you for letting me share." Our next story of the night comes from Jacob. Jacob's story is called 2 Spirits, 1 Demon. Jacob says, "Hi. I have had 3 encounters that I've never told anyone about before. I will try to be as brief as I can. The first time I encountered a ghost was when I was 8 years old. My family drove 2 hours to say goodbye to my grandmother, as she did not have much time left. Her and I were close, and I always insisted on moving a chair right by her bed in the nursing home. On the drive home, I saw her on the side of the highway, looking at the car and waving to me. As soon as we got home, my parents got a call that she had passed away. I have felt her presence in times where I am especially vulnerable ever since. The next time I saw a ghost was on a joyride with a friend. We pulled into the driveway of an old house that was falling apart. The front door of the house was completely gone. I saw a man stumble into the doorframe covered in blood. I nudged my friend and looked over at her for a brief second to get her attention, but she had already seen it. I later found out that a man killed his wife and family inside this house before killing himself. My last story involves a demon that I encountered in an episode of sleep paralysis. I had green vision, for lack of a better term, for 3 nights. Each night, I watched myself almost be pulled from the bed before waking up. The 4th night was different. There was no pulling, but I remember looking at my closed bedroom door. A black oval appeared on the door, then a black shadow materialized from the door. It walked over to the foot of my bed and turned to look at me. I was frozen in terror, as I could see horns on its head. I know that may sound cliché, but that's what I saw. It compressed into a black cloud and started to float towards me. I finally screamed out for my dad, who came bursting into the room and turned the light on. The cloud melted into the light the second it turned on. When I looked at my father, he looked at me and asked if I had really seen it, or if I had been dreaming. I know what I saw. Sorry for this being so long, but I needed to tell somebody who would understand, and hopefully I can meet people who have experienced the same thing, so that we can support each other and help process what has happened to us. Thank you so much for this podcast. It always makes me feel less alone. Jacob. Our next story of the evening comes from Christopher. Christopher's story is called A Haunting on the Coast of Washington. Christopher says, first, some backstory about the location itself. Near the touristy town of Ocean Shores, Washington, my great-aunt and uncle own a small motel 2 miles down the road. They live across the street in a home that has seen many uses over the years. The building is around 100 years old and has been a home, a shop, and even a gas station at one point. Currently, they live there with their 2 dogs and 2 cats. Now, there was this lady who lived here years ago, who was a caretaker for an old woman who had moved out to this area over 100 years ago. Both of these women died in that house. For this account, the woman who was a caretaker is the important one to remember. My great-aunt has always been more sensitive to ghosts and more receptive to visitations and experiences, so naturally, this house has provided many. My aunt believes that the spirit who currently resides in this house is that of the woman who was a caretaker. She is a playful spirit sometimes, especially when she wants someone to know that she is there. Sometimes my aunt will be cooking, listening to music with her Bluetooth speaker, and the song will change or the speaker will turn off completely. My aunt will laugh and say it's because the spirit didn't like the music, and she will simply tell the spirit, "Stop that, I was listening to that song," and the spirit will stop messing with the speaker. She seems to be intrigued by new technology that they bring into the house. Sometimes people staying in the bedroom that was the spirit's room in life will notice their cell phones light up at night, like when you bring up an iPhone to your face or touch it, and I mean light up when there is no notifications or reasons why it should light up. When my aunt and uncle got a new microwave, since they hadn't had one initially when they moved in, they installed it in the kitchen underneath the cupboards and hanging over the stove. That same night, my aunt heard this weird beeping sound that she was unfamiliar with, like someone was pressing buttons or something. It was only her and my uncle in the house, and they were both in bed. The next morning, my uncle went to go heat up something in the microwave and started pressing the buttons. My aunt gasped, realizing that this was the noise she had heard the previous night. One time, they hired an electrician to install some wiring in the house. This man must have been a bit of a psychic himself. For some reason that I'm not aware of, he had to do some work in the attic. When he went to go do his work, he came out a few minutes later and asked my aunt, "Ma'am, is your house haunted?" My aunt looked at him surprised that he would ask that and said, "Well, yes, it is. Why do you ask?" He had apparently opened the hatch to the attic, brought the ladder down, and looked up to see a woman in white staring down at him. He had promptly and calmly gone to find my aunt to, of course, notify her of what he had seen. She was not surprised, telling him that the spirit was simply curious about what he was doing with her house. He ended up finishing his work with no problem, after my aunt told the spirit that he was allowed to be there. Another time, my cousin, my great-aunt's daughter, was in the guest room, which happened to be the previous bedroom of the spirit that supposedly haunts the house. She was getting ready for bed when she noticed that someone was taking a step behind her every time she took a step around the entire room. She screamed and ran out to my aunt, telling her, "She's bothering me, Mom," and my aunt simply told her to tell the spirit to stop bothering her. She did so, and that was that. Now, more recently, I was spending the night at my aunt's place with my girlfriend and our dog. Of course, we stayed in the guest room, the spirit's former bedroom. I was a bit nervous, knowing what goes on at the house, but I knew that the spirit would do nothing to hurt us. It was the first night we were there, and it was bedtime. My girlfriend had gone into the room about an hour before I had, with our dog in tow. I stayed up a bit later to watch a movie with my aunt. I had been dreading going to bed in that room, merely because I get terrified pretty easily by the paranormal. Around midnight, I finally went to bed. I came into the room, and she had fallen asleep with the lamp on. I found this odd, but thought nothing of it really. I turned the lamp off and got into bed, a little freaked out by how dark the room was, and there was no street lamps outside, and no other lights at all. We were pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I did not sleep well that night. All night long, I heard various noises that would keep me up, and had several odd and nightmarish dreams. I heard footsteps in the room, knocking on the wall behind the bed, and other weird noises. I was not the only one. My dog heard the footsteps too, standing up every once in a while to see who was walking around in our room. There was no one there every time that I got up the courage to check. Some noises I could explain, like the door to the bathroom opening when my aunt or my uncle would get up in the middle of the night, but there were many I had no explanation for, especially the footsteps. Sometimes it was like pacing back and forth in both the room and in the hallway outside the room. In one of the dreams I had, there was an old woman standing over me wearing a dress I could barely make out, as the room was dark. She was just standing there, staring at me with eyes that were hollow black holes. Even now, I'm not sure if it was a dream or not. Needless to say, we slept with the lights on the rest of the time that we were there. Our next story of the night comes from Ben. Ben's story is called The Little Girl Stuck on Staten Island. This story has a violent ending, so please use discretion while listening. Ben says, "Hello, I am Chef Ben. I have been listening to your podcast for some time now, and decided now is a good time to share a story of mine with you. I am a sensitive. My grandmother, who I get any gifts from, wasn't a psychic per se, but she was very gifted. She knew a lot, and felt a lot. When she was young, she could tell you to answer the phone before it rang. This was the type of woman she was. We are Roman Catholic by religion, and speaking about spirits and God are nothing out of the normal for us. Most of my family tends to roll their eyes when we speak about things happening. They laugh it off as nonsense, but she always taught me that when you have a certain gift, you are to help out in any way you are capable. When I was younger, I feel like seeing or talking to spirits was more frequent. As I get older, I am 37 now, I feel it less and less. I have several stories I can share, but this one is on the top of my personal list. For information, my grandmother passed away years ago. She is now reunited with her husband and my father. This story happened shortly after my father passed away when I was 23 years old, and engaged to an older woman with 2 children, living on Staten Island, New York. As you can tell by my name, I am a chef by trade, and I was getting ready for work one morning. My fiancé was sitting in the living room watching TV down the hall from the bathroom. The kids were both at school. I was brushing my hair, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw her daughter, who was 12 years old, poke her head around in the bathroom and walk down the hall into her room, which was straight ahead. It didn't feel like her daughter, and it didn't feel like her either, so I poked my head around the door and asked if she had gotten off the couch. She hadn't, and I asked if the little girl was home for some reason. She wasn't. I started to get that old feeling again, the one where you know someone else is there, but you can't see them. I knew for a fact that I saw someone. The outline of their body and face were still fresh in my mind as they stopped by the bathroom door. I knew I saw someone walk toward her room. Being a sensitive, I always got an odd feeling from this apartment, but I wasn't really in a great mental space after my father passing anyway, so I considered all the feelings I had had to be my heartbreak, my uneasiness there, and the depression I was always feeling. But after seeing her, I knew this wasn't the particular case. I started paying attention again to goings-on, until a few days later, leaving for work, I saw our landlord checking things out outside. I asked him what had happened in this apartment. He pretended to act like he didn't know what I was talking about. I knew I had to be sneaky, and I couldn't really say, "Who's the dead kid?" I asked who the last renters were. He then said it was boarded up for quite some time, and he had bought it only recently. I got slick after that and said, "Oh, so the stories are true." He then acted like I got him, and he told me about the situation that happened about 2 years back, when it was abandoned, and how a homeless man grabbed a young girl from the projects around the corner and raped and killed her in the apartment. In fact, in the very same room I saw her walking into, my ex-fiancé's daughter's room. I went from satisfied knowing I was right to heartbroken for this kid who was obviously stuck in this apartment. So I called my grandmother and asked her what to do after filling her in on the story. Long story short, I blessed the house with holy water in every single corner while reciting Catholic prayers. From what I saw, Everything felt lighter, less gray, and more color. I really hope I did something to help that child's passing. I couldn't imagine being stuck after something so horrible happening, and not being able to be at rest. Our last story of the night comes from Hazel. Hazel's story is called Auntie's House and a Ghost or Demon. Hazel says, "Hi, Nick. My experience happened while staying in the downstairs bedroom at my auntie's house when I was around 16 years old. The room had a double bed, a television on a bracket from the corner of the room, and a door opposite the television. My aunt's cat used to come and sleep on the bed with me. I had the door open half a foot so the cat could get out if she needed to. I was struggling to sleep, so I was listening to my CD Walkman at the time, trying to drift off. I started to feel scared for no apparent reason. The cat was lying right next to me, leaning on me, and suddenly got tense. My CD Walkman started skipping like it would do if the CD was scratched or if you were moving it about, except it was flat on the bed, and the CD wasn't scratched, and it hadn't skipped before. Then it started playing backwards, which wasn't a function on the device. I took out my earbuds instantly. When I did that, the television turned itself on. Just static, not a channel. But this was an older television that didn't have a timer or anything for it to do that by itself. It started flipping through channels, but all were static. The remote was on the bedside table, with nothing leaning on the buttons. The cat was looking at the corner where the TV was up on the bracket, but she was looking near the floor, where there was nothing I could see. The cat hunched her back, her tail fluffed up, and she hissed. She was normally a gentle, friendly cat, and we had never heard her hiss. Then the door that I had left open so the cat could leave slammed shut. I was still in bed, and the cat was still on the bed with me. This was winter, and all the windows were closed. There was no way that it was wind. I'm not even ashamed to say that at age 16, after that, I took the cat out of the room as quickly as I could, and I went to the room that my mom was staying in and slept in the same double bed as my mom for the rest of the night. Other stories about what my auntie and my uncle have seen while living there, and my mom and my auntie saw in their garden, are below. This is my mom's account of the ghost or demon at my auntie's house. When I was around 7 years old, we were at my auntie's house, which always gave me the creeps. The living room and downstairs bedroom the most, but other rooms could also be scary, as if whatever exists there mainly stays there, but moves around the home and garden. My mom was standing at the back door looking at the garden and chatting with my auntie, who didn't smoke but was standing with her. A small dark shape caught their eye. Thinking it was their cat, at first they didn't think much of it, until the cat walked past them into the kitchen. They then looked again in the garden. The shape was brown-gray, and about a foot high with no specific shape to it, like smoke. My mother had finished her cigarette at that point, and it was about 15 feet away. There were no neighbors having barbecues. The weather was overcast and cold. Both my mother and my auntie watched this smoky shape move across the garden before it dissipated into the hedge. Both my mom and my auntie talked about what they had seen and confirmed it was the same creature. My mother didn't tell me about it until I had my experience in the downstairs bedroom. This next story is one of my auntie and my uncle's experience in their house. My auntie and uncle were standing on either side of the bottom of their staircase, talking about something before my uncle was going to go upstairs. Neither of them smoke, and don't allow anyone to smoke in the house. It was just them two in the house and their cat. While they were talking about something trivial, like bringing dirty laundry downstairs, a 1-foot-high floating brown-gray smoky mass moved silently down the stairs. Hovering around a foot off the ground, it went in between my auntie and uncle and turned and then went into the doorway behind my auntie, into the living room before it dissipated. They both saw the same thing, and my uncle hadn't shared the experience that my mom and my auntie did, and he didn't believe them until he saw it that day, at the same time as my auntie. Sorry they are so long, but I wrote it out as I remembered my experiences and being told about the 2 other experiences by my family. I still don't know if it's a ghost or a demon, but I know that I didn't get any good feelings from it. Kind regards, Hazel. As we come to the end of tonight's episode, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for tuning in and supporting the podcast. Until next time, I hope you all have a safe and healthy week, and I'd like to say thank you to Chloe, Catherine, Zoila, Shay, Jacob, Christopher, Ben, Hazel, and our 2 anonymous contributors for writing in and sharing their experiences with all of us. If any of you have thoughts, advice, or a similar experience that you'd like to share with one of tonight's storytellers, you can email me, and I'll be sure to forward your message on to them. New episodes of the Paranormal Mysteries podcast are produced every Sunday, with new midweek mysteries airing every Wednesday, and they're available on all of your favorite podcast apps. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries podcast, thank you so much for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.